Some promises don't fade with time. They simply wait for the right heartbeat to awaken them again. Every autumn, when the leaves turned amber across the Northern Territories, Alpha King Adrian Blackwood traveled beyond the borders of his own kingdom. His council believed it was a ceremonial inspection. His generals assumed he was checking alliances between neighboring packs. Only Adrian knew the truth. He was searching. 15 years had passed since the little girl vanished beneath a sky filled with smoke, confusion, and frightened voices. Everyone else had accepted the official story. She had been lost forever. Some whispered she had died before sunrise. Others insisted another pack had claimed her. Adrian had never believed either version. Deep inside, something older than memory refused to let go. It was not stubbornness. It was certainty. As the king's convoy approached the peaceful Grey River pack, banners fluttered gently above wooden watchtowers while families gathered along the main road to welcome their unexpected visitors. Children laughed, merchants displayed woven blankets and polished carvings, and elders bowed respectfully as Adrian rode past on his black stallion. His expression remained calm, almost distant, until a single movement near the far end of the square caught his eye. A young woman knelt beside an elderly healer, carefully arranging baskets filled with dried herbs. Her dress was simple, her hands carried the quiet confidence of someone used to helping others before herself, and loose strands of chestnut hair slipped across her pale face whenever the afternoon breeze drifted through the village. She looked completely ordinary. Yet the moment Adrian saw her blue eyes lift toward him, time seemed to lose its place. His heartbeat stumbled. The sounds around him faded into silence. Those eyes. He had searched countless villages, crossed thousands of miles, and met hundreds of women over the years, but no pair of eyes had ever looked like those. Calm as winter skies. Gentle enough to quiet every fear he had carried since childhood. Evelyn Carter lowered her gaze almost immediately, assuming the king's attention belonged to someone standing behind her. She had spent her entire life blending into the background. Orphan. Omega. Useful when healing was needed. Invisible when celebrations began. She had grown accustomed to people looking through her rather than at her. As Adrian continued riding forward, he forced himself not to turn around again. A king could not abandon dignity because of a feeling. But the wolf sleeping within him had already awakened, restless and certain, whispering a truth his mind hardly dared to believe. After 15 years of unanswered questions, destiny had not brought him to another dead end. Destiny had quietly placed the girl he had never stopped searching for directly in his path, and she had absolutely no idea who she truly was. The royal procession continued through Grey River Pack, but Adrian remembered almost nothing of the greetings offered by local elders or the carefully prepared feast waiting inside the Great Lodge. Every polite conversation blurred into meaningless noise because his thoughts remained fixed on the quiet young woman arranging herbs beneath the afternoon sun. He had spent years chasing fragments of impossible hope. A child with silver blue eyes. A moon-shaped birthmark hidden behind her left shoulder. A lullaby only 2 families had ever known. Every trail had disappeared into silence. Every witness had eventually admitted they did not know what became of the missing Omega girl. Yet one brief glance had stirred something inside him that no amount of reason could silence. Across the village, Evelyn carried 2 woven baskets toward the healer's cottage, completely unaware that the most powerful man in the Northern Territories had not forgotten her face for a single day. The old healer, Martha Bennett, smiled as Evelyn stepped through the doorway. "You are distracted today," the elderly woman observed while grinding dried lavender into powder. Evelyn forced a gentle smile. "I suppose everyone is. It is not every day a king visits our little pack." Martha looked toward the open window where distant voices drifted through the breeze. "Did you notice how he looked at you?" Evelyn laughed softly and shook her head. "Kings do not notice women like me." She believed those words because they had shaped nearly every year of her life. She had arrived at Grey River Pack when she was barely old enough to remember names. The elders always told the same story. A traveling merchant discovered her wandering alone after a terrible storm had separated her from her family. No relatives ever came searching. No records existed. She accepted the story because she had nothing else to hold on to except scattered dreams that never quite made sense. Sometimes she dreamed of towering pine trees covered in fresh snow even during summer. Sometimes she heard the distant laughter of a boy whose face disappeared each time she tried to remember it. On quiet nights she would awaken with tears on her cheeks, unable to explain why her heart ached for people she could not name. Martha often called them memories hiding beneath fear, but Evelyn dismissed the idea. Dreams were only dreams. Outside, preparations for the evening banquet filled the village with music and warm conversation. Children raced through lantern-lit streets while cooks carried steaming pots toward the gathering hall. Everyone celebrated the royal visit except Adrian, who remained alone on the wooden balcony outside his guest chamber. His trusted beta, Nathan Cole, stepped beside him carrying 2 cups of hot cedar tea. "You have been silent since we arrived," Nathan said carefully. Adrian accepted the cup without drinking. "Have our scouts investigate every record this pack possesses." Nathan frowned. "Looking for what?" Adrian kept watching the distant healer's cottage where a single candle now glowed behind the window. "Not what," he answered quietly. "Who?" Nathan studied his king for several long seconds before asking the question he had avoided for years. "Do you truly believe she survived?" Adrian's silver eyes never left the small cottage across the village. "I never stopped believing." At that exact moment Evelyn opened an old cedar chest searching for fresh blankets before the evening chill arrived. Hidden beneath folded linen rested a weathered silver pendant she had owned for as long as she could remember. She turned it over in her hand as moonlight spilled across its worn surface, revealing the faint outline of half of an unfamiliar crest, unaware that somewhere only a few hundred yards away another pendant bearing the missing half rested against the heart of the man who had spent 15 years searching for the girl who carried its match. Sleep came slowly to Evelyn that night. The strange feeling that had settled over the village since the royal arrival refused to leave her heart. She lay beneath a hand-stitched quilt inside her small room, listening to the soft chorus of crickets beyond the open window, but every time she closed her eyes she saw the same pair of silver eyes watching her with quiet disbelief. There had been no pride in the king's expression, no cold authority, and certainly no judgment. Instead, there had been something she could not explain, something painfully familiar. Long after midnight she finally drifted into sleep, and the dream returned once again. Snow covered a forest she had never visited, sparkling beneath a brilliant full moon. A little girl laughed as she chased glowing fireflies between towering pine trees. Somewhere behind her, a young boy called her name with a smile full of certainty. "Evelyn, wait for me." She turned toward the voice, but before she could see his face, a warm hand slipped a silver pendant into her palm. "If we ever get separated," the boy whispered, "keep this with you. I will always find you." She tried to answer, but the wind carried the words away. The forest dissolved into white light, and she woke with tears quietly resting against her cheeks. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains as Martha prepared breakfast over the small stone hearth. She glanced toward Evelyn and noticed the familiar sadness lingering in her eyes. "The dream again?" she asked gently. Evelyn nodded while absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the old pendant resting around her neck. "It feels more real every time. I can hear voices now." Martha remained silent for several moments before speaking. "Perhaps memories do not disappear forever. Sometimes they wait until the heart is ready." Evelyn smiled politely, although she still believed the old healer simply wanted to comfort her. Meanwhile, inside the guest lodge, Adrian stood before an enormous table covered with worn maps, faded journals, and reports collected over 15 years. Nathan quietly entered carrying a leather folder. "The village records arrived," he said. Adrian immediately opened the documents, scanning every page with growing concentration. According to the official register, Evelyn had arrived at Grey River Pack just after her 5th birthday. There were no names listed for her parents. No witnesses except 2 hunters who had supposedly discovered her wandering near the eastern river after a storm. Adrian frowned. He had read hundreds of reports over the years, and this story felt painfully familiar. Too simple. Too complete. Almost as though someone had wanted people to stop asking questions. His finger paused over one small detail. The date. It matched the exact week Evelyn had disappeared from Blackwood territory 15 years earlier. Nathan noticed the change in Adrian's expression. "What is it?" Adrian slowly closed the journal. "This is not an accident." Nathan lowered his voice. "Do you believe the records were altered?" Adrian looked toward the village outside where smoke drifted peacefully from cottage chimneys. Someone wanted a frightened little girl to become someone else. At that same hour, Evelyn walked toward the marketplace carrying fresh herbs for the morning clinic. Villagers greeted her warmly, but an elderly traveler sitting beside the fountain suddenly stared at the silver pendant resting against her chest. His weathered face turned pale. Before Evelyn could ask whether something was wrong, the old man whispered almost to himself, "That crest. I have not seen the Mooncrest family emblem in more than 15 years. Evelyn froze. The word struck her harder than she expected because for the first time in her life, a complete stranger had recognized something she had carried since childhood, and somewhere across the village, without realizing it, the Alpha King had just uncovered the very same piece of the forgotten truth. The old traveler never repeated his words. The instant he realized Evelyn had heard him, he lowered his eyes, gathered his worn satchel, and quietly disappeared into the growing crowd before she could ask another question. She stood frozen beside the village fountain, her fingers instinctively closing around the silver pendant beneath her cloak. Mooncrest. The name echoed through her thoughts like the final note of a forgotten song. She whispered it to herself several times, hoping it would awaken something hidden inside her memory, but only a strange ache settled deeper within her heart. By the time she returned to Martha's cottage, the morning sunlight had filled every corner of the herb garden. Martha noticed Evelyn's troubled expression immediately. "What happened?" she asked. Evelyn carefully repeated every word the traveler had spoken. The elderly healer became unusually quiet. Instead of answering, she walked toward an old bookshelf and gently brushed dust from a faded wooden box that Evelyn had never seen before. Inside rested dozens of yellowed letters tied together with a blue ribbon. "These belong to my late husband," Martha explained softly. "He spent many years traveling between packs before we settled here." Evelyn watched as Martha searched through the bundle until one folded page slipped free. The ink had faded with age, but one sentence remained perfectly clear. The Mooncrest family disappeared after a tragedy that no one ever fully explained. Martha looked into Evelyn's eyes with growing concern. "I never thought much about it until today." Before Evelyn could respond, a respectful knock sounded at the cottage door. Standing outside was Nathan Cole, dressed in the dark colors of the Royal Guard. His expression remained warm and courteous as he removed his gloves. "His Majesty wishes to thank the healer who has cared for Grey River Pack for so many years," he said with a slight bow. "He has requested permission to visit this afternoon." Evelyn immediately stepped backward. "Then I should leave before he arrives." Nathan smiled politely. "Actually, His Majesty specifically asked that you remain as well." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "Me?" Nathan simply nodded before taking his leave. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Martha slowly placed the old letter back inside the wooden box. "I believe the king is searching for answers," she murmured. "Perhaps answers that involve you." Across the village, Adrian stood alone beneath the towering branches of an ancient oak overlooking the river. In his hands rested the silver pendant he had carried since childhood. Time had worn its edges smooth, but the carved wolf beneath the crescent moon remained untouched. He remembered the day he had divided the keepsake into two matching halves after convincing a little girl that best friends should always carry the same promise. He had been only 12 years old. She had laughed, tucked her half safely beneath her cloak, and declared that no matter where life carried them, they would always find each other again. He had believed her then. He believed her now. Nathan approached quietly and handed him a small leather journal recovered from the village archives. "There is something else," he said. Adrian opened the journal and discovered a single sketch drawn by an unknown hand nearly 15 years earlier. It showed a frightened little girl wearing half of a broken pendant around her neck exactly as Evelyn wore it today. Beneath the drawing, one sentence had been written in careful script. "She arrived without a family, but someone insisted we never ask where she truly came from." Adrian slowly closed the journal as determination settled across his face. The search that had defined half his life was no longer leading him toward a mystery. It was leading him toward someone who had been hidden in plain sight, and before another sunset passed, he intended to learn who had worked so hard to erase the truth. By late afternoon, the healer's cottage had never felt so small. Sunlight poured through the windows, filling the room with the comforting scent of rosemary, cedar and dried chamomile, yet Evelyn could not quiet the nervous rhythm of her heartbeat. She arranged fresh herbs on the wooden shelves for the third time, only to realize she had placed every bundle exactly where it had been before. Martha noticed the restless movement and smiled kindly. "You have welcomed strangers your entire life. Today is no different." Evelyn managed a faint smile. "Kings are not strangers. They belong to stories." A gentle knock interrupted the conversation. Nathan opened the door first, then stepped respectfully aside. Adrian entered without the grand ceremony Evelyn had expected. He wore a dark traveling coat instead of royal robes, and although every movement reflected quiet authority, there was an unexpected warmth in his eyes. Martha bowed politely. Evelyn followed a heartbeat later. "There is no need for formalities," Adrian said softly. "Today I came to thank the woman who has cared for this village for so many years." His words were directed toward Martha, but his eyes briefly found Evelyn before moving away again. The small exchange lasted only a second, yet it stirred another strange feeling neither of them could explain. Martha invited the king to sit beside the stone fireplace while she prepared fresh tea. For several peaceful minutes they spoke about the changing seasons, the health of the village, and the harvest expected before winter. Adrian listened carefully to every answer, but his attention quietly returned to Evelyn each time she crossed the room. She moved with the same calm grace he remembered from long ago, always placing others before herself, always offering help before anyone asked. Even the way she tucked loose strands of chestnut hair behind her ear awakened memories he had guarded for half his life. Finally Adrian spoke the question that had brought him there. "May I ask where you were born?" Evelyn hesitated before answering honestly. "I wish I knew. I was told I arrived here as a little girl after becoming separated from my family during a storm." Adrian remained silent. The explanation matched the village records perfectly, yet hearing it spoken aloud only deepened his doubts. "Do you remember anything from before then?" he asked gently. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the pendant resting against her hand. "Only dreams. Snow. Tall pine trees. A boy whose face disappears every time I try to see him." The room became completely still. Adrian felt his breath catch inside his chest. The forest she described overlooked Blackwood Castle exactly as it had 15 years ago. Before anyone spoke again, Martha quietly placed 3 cups of tea on the table. As Evelyn reached forward to accept hers, the silver pendant slipped free from beneath her collar. It swung gently in the afternoon light. Adrian instinctively reached inside his own coat and withdrew the pendant he had carried every day since childhood. Neither of them noticed the movement until the 2 pieces reflected the same beam of sunlight at exactly the same moment. Evelyn stared in disbelief. The carvings matched perfectly. One half displayed a crescent moon. The other completed the image with a standing wolf beneath the stars. They fit together so naturally that even before anyone touched them, it was obvious they had once been a single keepsake. Evelyn looked up with trembling uncertainty. "How can you have the other half?" Adrian could not answer immediately because memories he had buried beneath 15 years of determination came rushing back all at once. At last he met her eyes and quietly asked the question he had imagined asking thousands of times. "Evelyn, has anyone ever told you that your name used to be something else?" The question lingered in the quiet room long after Adrian had spoken it. Evelyn searched his face, hoping to find some hint that this was all an elaborate misunderstanding, but the sorrow in his silver eyes felt far too genuine to be imagined. She slowly shook her head. "No, I have always been Evelyn. At least, that is what I was told." Adrian lowered his gaze to the 2 matching halves of the pendant resting side by side on the wooden table. "When we were children," he said carefully, "there was a girl who lived near Blackwood Castle. She was brave enough to climb trees higher than anyone else and stubborn enough to insist she could outrun every boy in the village. Before I left for my first royal training, I divided this pendant into 2 pieces. I promised that no matter where life carried us, we would always find each other again." Evelyn listened without interrupting, yet every word stirred something deep inside her that refused to remain asleep. Images flickered across her mind like distant flashes of moonlight. A towering oak tree. Tiny. Footprints in fresh snow. the laughter of a boy who always waited whenever she fell behind. She closed her eyes as a dull ache spread through her temples. Martha immediately placed a comforting hand upon her shoulder. "Do not force the memories," she whispered. "Let them come when they are ready." Evelyn inhaled slowly and opened her eyes once more. "I know those places," she admitted quietly. "I should not know them, but somehow I do." Adrian's heartbeat quickened, yet he resisted the temptation to push further. He had waited 15 years. He would not rush her now. Instead, he reached into his coat and unfolded a small piece of carefully preserved parchment. Although the edges had faded with age, the charcoal drawing remained remarkably clear. It showed two smiling children standing beneath an enormous pine tree. The little girl wore half of a broken pendant around her neck. The little boy held the other half in his hand. Evelyn stared at the drawing without speaking. Then her fingertips slowly brushed across the face of the little girl. A single word escaped her lips before she even realized she had spoken it. "Adrian." Silence filled the cottage. Nathan looked toward the king in astonishment. Martha quietly smiled through tears gathering in her eyes. Adrian barely breathed. "You remembered." Evelyn stepped backward, pressing one hand against her heart as fragments continued rushing into her thoughts. She remembered racing through endless forests. She remembered sitting beside a frozen creek while a young prince skipped smooth stones across the water. She remembered calling him by name every time he pretended to hide behind the ancient pines. The memories arrived like pieces of a shattered mirror slowly fitting together again. Yet one part remained hidden behind darkness. "I remember you," she whispered. "But I cannot remember why I left." Adrian's expression softened. "Because someone took that choice away from you." Those words settled heavily inside the room. Martha slowly opened the old wooden box once more and removed the faded letter she had found earlier. This time she unfolded the final page completely. Hidden beneath years of dust was another sentence no one had noticed before because the ink had nearly disappeared. Martha carried the paper toward the window where late afternoon sunlight illuminated the faded writing. Her eyes widened. "This was not a storm," she said softly. "Whoever brought the little girl here ordered every witness to remain silent and to raise her under a different name." Nathan accepted the letter and studied the nearly invisible signature written beneath the final line. His expression immediately changed. He looked toward Adrian with quiet disbelief before speaking. "Your Majesty, this order was signed by someone who once served inside Blackwood Castle itself." The cottage remained silent after Nathan spoke those words. Adrian accepted the faded letter and studied the signature again, hoping he had misunderstood what lay before his eyes. He had not. The name belonged to Edwin Hawthorne, a trusted royal steward who had vanished shortly after Evelyn disappeared 15 years earlier. Until that moment, everyone had believed the man had simply retired to live beyond the northern forests. Adrian slowly folded the letter and looked toward the window where evening light painted the village in shades of gold. "He did not disappear," Adrian said quietly. "He was hiding from the truth." Evelyn listened carefully, struggling to connect a stranger's name with memories that still came only in scattered fragments. "Why would someone from your castle want to hide a little girl?" she asked. Adrian did not answer immediately because the question had haunted him for years. Nathan spoke first. "There were rumors long ago that certain noble families feared an ancient prophecy connected to the Mooncrest bloodline. Most dismissed it as folklore." Martha looked toward the old bookshelf deep in thought. "Legends have a way of surviving because some part of them is true." Adrian nodded slowly. The Mooncrest family was respected because they united rival packs through compassion instead of fear. They believed strength meant protecting those with the quietest voices. Not everyone admired those ideals. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Somehow those words felt strangely familiar, as though she had heard them. Long before this day, a warm breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. For an instant another memory surfaced. She saw a graceful woman with gentle blue eyes kneeling beside her beneath a flowering tree. The woman smiled as she adjusted the little silver pendant around Evelyn's neck. "Never forget who you are," the woman whispered. "Kindness is the greatest strength our family possesses." Evelyn gasped softly and instinctively touched the pendant. "I remember my mother." Tears gathered before she could stop them. I still cannot see her face clearly, but I remember her voice. Adrian stepped forward without hesitation, then stopped himself a respectful distance away. He understood that memories returned best when they were given space instead of pressure. You are remembering because the truth has finally found you, he said gently. Before anyone could continue, hurried footsteps approached outside the cottage. One of Grey River Pack's village elders appeared at the doorway, breathing heavily from the climb. Your Majesty, he said with a respectful bow. While cleaning the old records hall this evening, we discovered a locked chest hidden beneath loose floorboards. The key was attached to the same symbol carved onto the pendant the young healer wears. Adrian exchanged a glance with Evelyn. None of them had known such a chest existed. Minutes later they gathered inside the dusty archive where the elder carefully placed the weathered cedar chest upon a long wooden table. Time had darkened the wood, but the carved crescent moon remained unmistakable. Evelyn hesitated before placing her pendant into the small carved opening beside the lock. Fit perfectly. A quiet click echoed through the room. The lid slowly lifted. Inside rested a folded baby blanket embroidered with the mooncrest crest, several family letters tied with silver thread, and a small leather journal. Adrian carefully opened the first page. His expression changed almost instantly. The journal had not been written by a stranger. It had been written by Edwin Hawthorne himself, and the opening sentence sent a chill through every heart in the room. If anyone is reading this, Adrian whispered aloud, then the child survived, and it is finally time for the Alpha King to learn who ordered her to be taken away. Adrian turned the fragile pages with extraordinary care, as though every line carried the weight of 15 lost years. Edwin Hawthorne's handwriting remained steady despite the passage of time. I write this not to excuse my silence, but to preserve the truth before it disappears forever. The child was never abandoned. She was taken from Blackwood territory under direct orders from someone who feared what her future might unite. The room fell completely still. Nathan read over the king's shoulder while Martha gently held Evelyn's trembling hand. Adrian continued reading. Edwin described how several influential nobles had become convinced that the friendship between young Prince Adrian Blackwood and the last daughter of the Mooncrest family would one day unite powerful packs under a single peaceful alliance. Those who had built their influence through division believed such unity would weaken their own control. Rather than allowing destiny to unfold, they secretly arranged for the little girl to disappear. Edwin confessed that he had been ordered to erase every official record of her identity, but after seeing the frightened child separated from everything she loved, he could not bring himself to destroy the final evidence. Instead, he hid the letters, the blanket, and his journal inside the archive, hoping someone worthy would eventually uncover the truth. The final paragraph made Adrian lower the journal for a long moment. If the king has found this journal, then he never stopped searching. That alone proves he has become the man the child always believed he would be. Evelyn closed her eyes as tears quietly slipped down her cheeks. More memories returned, no longer as scattered fragments but as living moments. She remembered running across the castle gardens carrying wildflowers while Adrian laughed behind her. She remembered his mother welcoming her like family during every festival. She remembered promising that one day they would protect every lonely child who had no place to call home. Most of all, she remembered the morning they had exchanged the broken pendant beneath the ancient pine tree. You promised you would find me, she whispered, looking toward Adrian through tearful eyes. Adrian smiled with quiet relief. I was late, but I kept my promise. The next morning the royal party departed Grey River Pack, but Evelyn did not leave as an orphan uncertain of her past. She traveled beside Adrian with Martha and Nathan accompanying them toward Blackwood Castle, carrying the journal and every preserved letter with them. Along the journey they passed familiar rivers and towering forests that awakened more forgotten memories with every mile. When the castle finally appeared beyond the hills, Evelyn stopped her horse without realizing it. The towering stone walls, the silver banners dancing above the towers, and the enormous pine standing proudly near the entrance all felt impossibly familiar. Elder servants who had worked at the castle since before Adrian became king slowly gathered in the courtyard as the travelers arrived. One elderly housekeeper looked at Evelyn only once before covering her mouth in astonishment. Those eyes, she whispered. They belong to Lady Eleanor Mooncrest. Another servant stepped forward carrying an old family portrait that had hung inside the castle library for decades. He carefully placed it beside Evelyn without saying a word. She stared at the painting, hardly able to breathe. The smiling woman in the portrait possessed the same gentle blue eyes she had begun remembering only hours before. Beside her stood a little girl wearing the same silver pendant and smiling toward a young prince with bright silver eyes. As the final pieces of her forgotten childhood settled into place, Evelyn realized she had not merely returned to a castle she once visited. She had finally come home, unaware that the greatest revelation was still waiting behind the doors of the royal council chamber, where the names of everyone involved in the conspiracy had been preserved in records no one had opened for 15 years. The council chamber had remained untouched for years, its towering shelves filled with journals, treaties, and sealed records that preserved the history of Blackwood Castle. As morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, Adrian placed Edwin Hawthorne's journal beside the ancient council archives. One by one, forgotten documents confirmed every word he had written. The conspiracy had never been the decision of an entire kingdom. It had been the work of a small group who feared that hope could become stronger than ambition. Long before Adrian became king, those responsible had quietly disappeared from positions of influence, their plans fading into history while the truth waited patiently to be uncovered. Adrian closed the final record and looked toward Evelyn with peaceful certainty. "No one can return the years we lost," he said softly. "But no one will ever erase your name again." Later that afternoon, the castle courtyard filled with people from neighboring packs who had gathered after hearing the extraordinary news. Elder servants, visiting leaders, and families stood together beneath the ancient pine where two children had once exchanged a simple promise. Martha stepped forward carrying the restored silver pendant. The two matching halves had been carefully joined together by the royal jeweler without hiding the delicate line where they had once been separated. Martha placed it gently into Evelyn's hands. "Some things become more beautiful because they were broken and found again," she whispered. Evelyn smiled through grateful tears before turning toward Adrian. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Words no longer seemed necessary. The years of searching, waiting, and remembering had already said everything that mattered. Adrian reached into his pocket and unfolded the faded charcoal drawing of the two children beneath the pine tree. He held it beside the living moment before them and quietly laughed. "We finally made it back." Evelyn looked from the old sketch to the towering tree above them, then toward the castle she had unknowingly missed every day of her life. "Home was never a place I had forgotten," she said. "It was a feeling that never stopped looking for me." The gathered crowd remained silent, allowing the quiet reunion to speak louder than any celebration. As evening settled across Blackwood Castle, lanterns glowed beneath the branches while the first stars appeared above the mountains. The joined pendant reflected the moonlight exactly as it had years before, no longer divided into separate pieces but made whole again. Adrian gently offered Evelyn his hand, not as a command, but as the same promise he had made beneath this very tree when they were children. This time she smiled without hesitation and placed her hand in his. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, the wind carried the scent of pine through the valley, and it almost sounded as though the forest itself had been waiting for this moment. Some people believe destiny arrives like thunder, changing everything in a single instant. But sometimes destiny is far quieter. Sometimes it is a promise protected by time, carried through years of silence, and fulfilled by two hearts that never truly stopped searching for each other.